If you've spent any reasonable amount of time in the anime community, then you already know how much controversy Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation brings to the anime space. And as an up and coming anime YouTuber, I want to throw my hat in the ring. In the modern era of anime content creation, it almost feels like a rite of passage to talk about one of the big five discourse animes, those being Mushoku Tensei, Sword Art Online, Solo Leveling, Rent a Girlfriend, and Classroom of the Elite. Whether you love them or hate them, these series dominate conversations online. Before I begin, I want to make one thing clear. Before making this video, I had never watched the anime or read the light novels. Everything I knew came from clips, edits, and the endless discourse surrounding the series. For this review, I'm judging the anime on its own merits. I'll only reference the light novel if the anime completely fails to explain something that's essential to understanding the story. When I sat down to watch season 1, I promised myself I would leave all online discourse at the door. I wanted to give the show a fair chance instead of letting other people's opinions shape my own. One thing I've noticed is that a lot of criticism, and even some of the praise, come from people referencing the light novel, but no adaptation is ever a perfect one-to-one recreation. Every adaptation changes something. Lines get rewritten, scenes get cut, characters receive less development, and sometimes entirely new scenes are added. When criticizing an adaptation, I think it's important to judge each medium on its own. You shouldn't have to read thousands of pages of a light novel just to understand an anime, and you shouldn't dismiss an entire light novel because its adaptation wasn't handled well. The best way I can explain this is with Twitch streams. A Twitch stream is an original experience, it's hours long, full of conversations, downtime, small character moments, and context. A YouTube upload is the highlight reel. It captures the biggest moments, but it inevitably leaves things out in order to fit a smaller format. Anime adaptations work the same way. The light novel is the full stream, while the anime is the edited YouTube video. A great adaptation can preserve the heart of the story, but it can't include everything. Important context, world building, and character development are often first things to be trimmed. That's why, throughout this review, I'm judging Mushoku Tensei as an anime first, not as a light novel adaptation. If the anime succeeds, it deserves credit. If it fails to explain something crucial, I allowed myself to look it up, only after I finished watching season 1. I'm sure most people watching this video have already seen the show, so I'm not going to break down every single episode or scene. Instead, this review will focus on why I believe most people either drop the series or outright hate it. One of Rudeus' strongest aspects of a character is his backstory, even if I don't agree with some of the decisions he made. Through a series of flashbacks, we learn that Rudeus stood up to 3 high school bullies who were harassing another student. He tells them to stop, and they mock him for trying to play the hero and drag him to the gym and begin pelting him with basketballs. Then they go a step further. They strip him naked and tie him to the front gate of the school. First of all, that seems like an incredibly serious crime. But second, I think this backstory raises a few questions. Rudeus is notably larger than the 3 bullies. Even if there were 3 of them, I find it hard to believe that he wouldn't be able to fight back at all. He's overweight, sure, but he doesn't look incapable of defending himself. Still, let's assume he froze in the moment and made the worst decision possible by not fighting back. That's believable. People react differently under extreme stress and humiliation. Later that day, his parents tell him that they're going to try to get the student expelled. And honestly, good on them. They did exactly what parents should do in that situation. From there, Rudy spirals into self-pity, and while I don't agree with every choice he makes afterwards, I completely understand why he would feel traumatized. The order of flashbacks is a little confusing in the anime, but I do believe he eventually tries to go back to school. When he returns, the students laugh at him, mock him, and even record videos making fun of him after the event. Personally, I never would have went back to the same school, but let's assume it's the only school available. After that, he never returns, and honestly, fair enough. Even though I think I would have made different decisions, I completely understand Rudeus' trauma. More importantly, that trauma isn't forgotten once he's reincarnated. It directly affects his actions in the new world. His fear of leaving the house isn't random, it's a consequence of everything that's happened in his previous life. That's good character writing. The story doesn't give him trauma for shock value, it shows how those experiences continue to shape him. Like most isekai series, Mushoku Tensei begins with a mystery. We see the main character sitting alone in front of his computer before he's suddenly kicked out of the house. As he's wandering the streets, he notices a group of teenagers about to be hit by a speeding truck. He rushes forward and pushes them out of the way. Ironically, it's probably the most selfless thing he did in this life. He manages to save the kids, but dies in the process. Through his internal monologue, we learn that Rudeus was 34 years old when he died. Assuming he left school around age 15, the anime never gives us an exact age. That means he spent roughly 19 years as a shut-in before being reincarnated. That's almost 2 decades of isolation. I wonder what was on his computer. I mean, surely it couldn't have been that bad. A common defense for many of the actions Rudeus takes, which I'll get into later, is that he's mentally and emotionally stunted because of the trauma he experienced in high school. The problem is that, at least from what the anime shows, there's very little evidence to support that interpretation. In his new life, Rudeus constantly refers to himself as 34-year-old man. Even his internal monologue is still the same adult voice from his previous life, and he repeatedly views himself through that lens. The anime never presents him as someone whose mind has regressed into the age of a child. Instead, it constantly reminds the audience that despite being reincarnated into a child body, he still considers himself 34. In one scene, he outright says,
Paul and Zenith. If I had to guess, I'd say they're in their mid-20s. I'm 34, so they're practically kids to me.
later, after being reincarnated for several years, he thinks to himself,
You better take the L, Paul. I know you can't tell, but I spent 2 decades weaseling my way out of unwinnable arguments.
Taken together, these scenes make it clear that Rudeus still identifies with the age and experiences of his previous life. His body may have been reborn, but his own thoughts consistently frame him as an adult who has simply been given another chance at life. All of these scenes happen within the first 3 episodes of the series, and nothing afterwards suggests that his mindset has fundamentally changed. Now, before anyone says, that was only in part 1, he changes his mind in part 2, let's take a look at what Rudeus says in season 1, part 2.
I'm pretty sure he's 30 this year. Still younger than I was when I died.
So, based on the anime itself, I think it's fair to say there's a clear consensus. Rudeus sees himself as a 34-year-old man, and there's nothing in this show that leads to otherwise. Now, I already know what people are going to say. I don't care that Rudeus is perverted. I've seen way more perverted anime characters than him. And honestly, I don't necessarily disagree. Anime is full of perverted characters. Many of them do things that are arguably worse than what Rudeus has done. My issue isn't that Rudeus is perverted. My issue is who the anime tells us he is. When a self-proclaimed 34-year-old man makes sexual comments about or behaves inappropriately towards child characters, that's where my criticism comes from. If the anime wants me to view him as a 34-year-old throughout the series, then I also have to judge his actions through that lens.
I'll have plenty of time to make her my ideal woman. Hold up. Does that mean she's gonna swim naked? Well, Eris is 13 now, and it's been a while since I snuck a peek. Kennel Master isn't a bad nickname, though. I'd love to muzzle Eris sometimes. Huh?
Despite what most people might say, I completely understand why so many people ended up dropping the show. The way Rudeus talks about the children around him is uncomfortable, and what makes it even worse is that the anime often treats these moments as comedy. Instead of framing his behavior as disturbing, the direction, music, and pacing frequently present it as a joke. My biggest issue isn't just that Rudeus behaves this way, it's that he rarely faces meaningful consequences for it. The show doesn't spend much time forcing him to reflect on his actions. I can't show the next scene because of YouTube, so I'll summarize it instead. Rudeus finds Eris asleep and proceeds to grope her. This is one of the moments where I think the writing could have been much stronger. You don't even need to completely remove the scene. Imagine if the scene had started the same way, but instead of continuing, Rudeus suddenly realized what he's doing. He pulls his hand back, sits there in silence, and genuinely reflects on how disgusting his actions are. That to me would have been compelling character development. Instead, the moment is largely played for laughs, where Eris eventually wakes up and punches him in the face. Personally, I much prefer the approach that the beginning after the end takes. Rather than immediately pursuing romantic relationships, the main character doesn't seriously pursue anyone in a romantic sense until both he and the other person are old enough for their relationship to feel appropriate. It truly is a shame that T-Bait never got an anime adaptation. Another common defense of Rudeus that I saw after watching the show is, if you hate Rudy, then you just hate isekai. I don't think this is a good argument either. The criticism of Rudeus is not simply because he's an isekai protagonist, or that he came from another world. The issue is that Rudeus is explicitly portrayed as a pedo towards child characters. A lot of discussion focuses on the fact that he did it with someone who, by our standards, is a child. And listen, I understand Eris had turned 15 and that in their world, 15 is considered adulthood. However, Rudeus is someone who lived as an adult in his previous life and carries those memories with him. In part 2, after Rudy and Eris are able to return home following the mana disaster, they end up sleeping together. The context surrounding Eris is also important. She is told that basically her entire family has been killed, and an advisor suggests that the best option would be for her to become a concubine of a noble in order to secure her safety and preserve what remains of her family. Eris takes time alone to think about it, and eventually she goes to Rudy's bed. She explains that she had recently turned 15. Her motivation was not simply romance. She felt hopeless and believed that becoming someone's concubine was her only option. She did not want to give in to a stranger, and she thought that if she was no longer a virgin, a noble would not want her. The biggest problem for me personally is not simply that the event happened, it's how the story handles Rudeus afterwards. He does not show much regret or meaningful reflection about what happened. The moment is largely treated as another part of his character rather than a serious mistake that he needs to confront. For a character whose entire story is supposed to be about becoming a better person, I think this was a missed opportunity. Having Rudeus recognize he crossed the line and genuinely struggling with that would have made his growth feel much more believable. But no, this is his reaction afterwards.
Wakey, wakey, Eris, it's morning. Time to have some fun. She's not here.
This scene is what ruined the season for me. It genuinely feels like the author wrote themselves into a corner with this storyline. I do understand what the story was trying to do. Eris has to not be a virgin so she can stay in the country and not marry a concubine, right? I mean, it's not like Eris is going to leave the country. Wait, Eris leaves immediately afterwards? So what was the point of that scene? What did Rudeus and Eris sleeping together actually add to the story? If Eris was going to leave the country anyways, then her being a virgin shouldn't have mattered. You can't even argue that Rudeus regrets his decision, because his actions afterwards don't show that. The reason he becomes depressed at the end of the season is not because he reflects on what happened, it's because he feels Eris abandoned him, and from an anime-only perspective, this is extremely difficult to understand. Why would Rudeus make this choice? Nothing up to that point besides his previous comments and behavior would make me believe that he has completely different morals from someone in the modern day. How is he okay with the situation? And before anyone says, but Eris came on to him first, I don't think that removes his responsibility in the situation. Rudeus is the one who sees himself as an adult. He is the person with 50 plus years of life experience and perspective to recognize that this isn't the right decision. He even says,
I do? What the hell is going on? Okay, think. Eris is feeling hopeless. She wants comfort. And I mean, yeah, I want to do it, but now? Wouldn't I be taking advantage of her?
he is aware of what is happening and he even considers it taking advantage of Eris. This is what makes this scene so difficult for many viewers. Eris leaving afterwards wasn't because they slept together. She left because she wanted to catch up to Rudeus and become stronger. So if Eris was going to leave anyway, why include the scene? What purpose does it serve? Does it develop Rudeus as a character? Does it show growth? Does it create an important conflict? Because from my perspective, it mostly adds another controversial moment to a character who is already so difficult for many viewers to sympathize with. Imagine if Hasan Piker was reincarnated into another world with all his current knowledge, memories, and life experiences, but he was placed into a child's body. Hasan is the same age Rudy was when he reincarnated. Would people say it's acceptable for him to pursue a relationship with a child because his new body is the same age as them? Most people would say no, because the issue is not just the new body he's in, it's the fact that he still has the mind and experience of an adult. And that is the main criticism that most people have with Rudeus. The fantasy setting does not remove the fact that he is still carrying the perspective of someone who lived an adult life in the modern era. And this is where I think the writing choices become frustrating. Rudeus having trauma makes sense. Rudeus refusing to leave the house makes sense. Rudeus being socially awkward makes sense. Rudeus struggling to adapt to his new life makes sense. Even Rudeus being slightly perverted, despite what most people would say, does make sense. Having him act this way while the story repeatedly tells us he is changing and becoming a better person creates a big disconnect. If another isekai protagonist did the same thing, they would receive the same criticism. This isn't about genre. This is about the character and how the story chooses to handle his actions. Rudeus didn't have to be written this way, and the series didn't have to frame these moments as jokes while asking the audience to believe he is becoming a better person. Even after everything I've mentioned, I still enjoyed the show. The characters are genuinely unique and the world feels alive. Every continent feels like its own place, with its own culture, people, and history. Whether we're on the demon continent or in human territories, it feels like there's actual societies existing beyond just the main characters. One thing I really appreciated is how the story handles side characters. A character who seems completely irrelevant at first can suddenly become important later on. For example, the horse-headed character from the demon continent initially seemed just like a random bully. He's rude, he mocks the party for using the name Dead End, and it feels like he's only there to create conflict. Then later, we learn that he and Roxy were actually party members in the past. Or the prince who was harassing Roxy in part 1. At first, he feels like a minor character who exists only for short moments, but later he becomes directly involved with the kidnapping of Rudeus. The show constantly takes characters who seem like background details and gives them more importance later on. The world building is also one of the strongest parts of the series. Each area has its own identity, including different architecture, culture, and even languages. The two languages we hear, Beast and Demon God, immediately sound different, Demon sounding harsher and more aggressive, while Beast has a rougher, more animalistic quality to it. These small details make the world feel much more developed. In fact, this is the only anime I've watched for this channel where I never skip the opening. Almost every opening sequence has something meaningful to add, whether it's showing character interactions, important locations, pieces of the world, or small details that become relevant later on. The openings and endings are some of the best I've seen. Now, do I think a few scenes hurt the overall experience? Yes, but I don't think those scenes erase everything the show does well. After making it through the entirety of the first season without looking anything up, I think I've earned the right to finally dig into Rudeus' past. The show has only given us fragments so far, and at this point, I'm curious to see why he was kicked out of his house. Because up till now, all we really know is he was kicked out of his house, not why. What the fuck? Alright, maybe this isn't canon. Let me check another source for context.
Mushoku Tensei defenders cope by saying Rudeus taking pictures of his niece is only in the web novel, but it was added back into canon last year, and you might eventually see it in the anime. In the original web novel, Rudeus secretly placed a camera in the bathroom of his niece who was only 10. Later, he did you-know-what with the footage during his parents' funeral. That scene was removed for the light novel, which became the official canon, until Redundant Reincarnation Volume 3 was released last year. The canon version changes slightly, but is still very disgusting. Rudeus' older brother had taken innocent pictures of his daughter and her friend playing in a kiddie pool with his new digital camera. Rudeus stole the memory card, copied the photos, and did the same thing he did in the web novel during his parents' funeral. His brother caught him, punched him, and kicked him out of the house.
Yeah, lock this guy up, bro. A story doesn't have to have a perfect protagonist to be worth watching. If someone drops the entire series because they dislike Rudeus, I do think they might be missing out on some of the things the show does well. After finishing the show, I rated Season 1 Part 1 an 8 out of 10, and Part 2 a 7 out of 10. And that's despite the fact that I genuinely dislike the main character, and I mean I really don't like Rudeus as a person, but I can still appreciate the story around him. A character doesn't need to be likable for a show to be enjoyable. A flawed or uncomfortable protagonist can make a story interesting. My issue was never that Rudeus isn't perfect. My issue was how the story chooses to handle some of those imperfections.